Good morning, and welcome to the workshop on active shooter response and lessons learned. I'm Dr. Lori Moore Merrill. I'm an assistant to the General President of the International, and I manage the Research Division, otherwise known as Technical Assistance and Information Resources. As part of my division, we have the Fire and EMS Operations Department. Now, that department evaluates emergency response systems and their capabilities and capacities who are joining us for this special session. I want to start by just describing our situation as it stands today. And we know that the emerging threat of terrorism and asymmetric warfare, specifically in small unit active shooter attacks, is certainly a concern, an ongoing concern for not only law enforcement, but for the fire service as well. We'll start with some definitions, and as you know, the attacks, active shooter attacks, is usually an armed radical with weapons in a public area, such as schools, shopping malls, nightclubs, churches, other areas where people will congregate with a threat to our sense of security in our daily lives. By definition, an active shooter event is an event involving one or more suspects who participate in an ongoing random and systematic shooting spree, demonstrating an intent to harm others with the objective of mass murder. Given the recent spate as what has become known as active shooter scenarios unfolding across our nation, fire and law enforcement departments, regardless of size or their capacity to respond, have to find ways to marshal the appropriate and effective responses to these type events. So today, with the head of the active shooter program at the FBI, Special Agent Catherine Swite is a 19-year-old, you'd like that, right? 19-year veteran of the FBI and senior executive responsible for the FBI's Active Shooter Initiative, an effort that was begun 3 years ago after the tragic elementary school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut. A national security expert in counterintelligence, she currently is working with the White House team to reduce gun violence. She leads the FBI's efforts to support law enforcement and other responders in preventing, responding to, and recovering from active shooter large-scale mass casualty incidents. Today, Special Agent Swite is going to talk to us about the data on active shooter incidents, the likelihood that they will continue, particularly in the homegrown violent extremist, and the importance of departments working with local law enforcement to prepare to respond to these events. Kate, will you come and speak with us this morning? Please welcome Kate Swite.
Is this me? This way? Okay. Good morning. Thank you for letting me come to your event this evening, this afternoon, this morning, whatever time it is, in case you're watching it in a different environment. As Lori mentioned, I've been with the FBI for quite a while, and I worked national security for a long time, and then all of a sudden, Newtown occurred, and here I am. So this is really all I do. And one of the things that, that made it difficult is we started out with a situation where we were doing whatever we needed to do, and we didn't really know what the answers were. So for me, let me see if I can do this, score. These slides, I believe, are going to be posted. So we generally don't do that, but I really felt it was important to do that. So probably the most important thing I want you to know here is that my email address is on here. So if you have questions or you need information, the email address will be here so you can find it. And I'll have my team get you whatever you are tracking down from the stuff that we talked about. So really, kind of here's where we sat from the beginning of Newtown. I get hauled into the office and they say, fix this problem, join this White House team and do this work. And we really found, the biggest problem is we didn't know what the problem was and how to solve it. So we started with kind of two different areas. One was this White House team that was FEMA and Health and Human Services and the Department of Education, and directives from the Vice President's office that our first thing that we needed to do was we needed to create new guides on how to develop emergency operations plans. So here I am, an agent. I'm like, I don't know, and I don't know why I need to be involved in these conversations, but I really came to learn that there was so much more that I didn't know. And so we developed these first 3 guides, which are actually available online. I brought a couple of paper copies in case anybody wants to see. And these guides, one of the reasons why these are valuable is when you go someplace, when we go someplace, when fire, first responders show up, the better prepared the facility is, the agency is, the organization, the business, the mall, the schools, the better and the more work they do in their emergency operations planning, the better it is for us, right, when we get there. They have a person who knows where to shut the HVAC off and where to shut the water off and where the wires are to get the electricity shut off. If you remember, I do research on, I've done a lot of research on these types of shootings, and the Azura Day Spa shooting up in Milwaukee, the poor first responders who ended up with a barricaded subject had the fire system going off and the sprinkler systems. They practically drowned laying on the floors, right? I know they dealt with sprinkler systems in San Bernardino. The ability to shut those systems off, that's really important. So that's why these emergency guides became super valuable for us to put together. And we did that also because Department of Education, now this is going to shock you, I know, but the federal government was not, all the agencies were not on the same page. And the Department of Education had a 4-step plan for developing your emergency plans, and FEMA had a 6-step plan. So that was not a lot of guidance either, right? So we put together these very simple guides that help everybody else get ready in case we all have to show up. The guides, we put together schools, universities, houses of worship first, but since this time we've done one for airports and hospitals. There's a business one that's actually on my desktop at work waiting for authorization from FEMA. If we can't get authorization from FEMA because of the transition in Washington right now, FEMA's already told us go ahead and release it, so we'll push that out too. These are something that you can point any business to, any school, any whatever. You can say, hey, you don't know what to do to be ready? These are the things you can do to be ready. Available online. Every single thing that I talk about, except for 2 things, are available on FBI.gov if you search active shooter. It's the same resources that are on FEMA's site, it's the same resources that are on HHS, the same resources that are on the White House sites. Our goal in the federal government was to give you guys a single point to get to your stuff. In the process of developing these guides, this is where the United States federal government came to a single voice on run, hide, fight. We did a lot of research and had a lot of arguments over what is the best thing to tell citizens. This run, hide, fight model was developed by the city of Houston and released 6 months before Sandy Hook. And I called the mayor's office in Houston and said, can we use this nationally? And they said yes. It's already available. It's a 6-minute video. There's a whole training program with it. It's available in about 6 or 7 languages. It's closed captioned for hearing impaired. It's ready to go, and we needed something ready to go, and we pushed it out nationally. I'll tell you one thing that I've heard about run, hide, fight. Some people say, oh, well, the run, hide, fight is bad because you have to do it in order. No, you don't. These are 3 verbs. These are the 3 things that happen in every situation. I can guarantee you that of all the people in this room, and this is going to be an incredibly arrogant thing to say, and I don't mean it this way, but I can guarantee you I am probably the most well-read and the most researched person on these types of incidents because I have done nothing but this for 4 years for the FBI, and I can guarantee you this is what happens at every scene. People run, people hide, and sometimes people fight. These are the 3 things that happen. We think that it's most important in the federal government. We adopted this model because we think it's most important that people recognize these are the 3 things that might happen. They need to know what to do in each situation. Some people ask us about guns and whether, what about if people have guns? Should they use that? Should they be armed? Shouldn't they be armed? We're not taking and don't need to take a position on guns or should they be armed or should they attack somebody with a gun or a knife or a chair. We just need to, we think it's really important that citizens who are the ones on the scene, the first ones who can respond, understand what their options are. If you had a chance to read the initial research that was done, which could be the next, no, the initial research that was done, this is really the only study that the federal government's ever done on active shooters, available on our website. This was done for 2000 to 2013, but we've updated the numbers, so they're also available on our site. And some of the other guys up here are going to talk about the numbers more specifically. When we did this research, one of the things that we found is that panic, and you guys know this because you're trained in it, the first thing that people do is they stop and they panic and they don't move. And the more that we can get people trained, civilians trained to appreciate that there are things that they need to do, just like when a fire occurs in the kitchen, hey, what do you need to do? If you don't know what to do, then you panic and you do nothing. In these situations, we want people to not panic. We want them to skip the panic part and we want them to move on. That's why we adopted Run, Hide, Fight. One of the other things that I would say we found across the board that was so limiting, you know, the Pulse nightclub happens, San Bernardino happens, Aurora happens, the theater shooting in Aurora happens, the mall in Pennsylvania, every single one, an after action is done and the after actions say the same things. Communications are a problem, ingress and egress are a problem, unified command, police officers, please you need to go where the fire is, or fire you need to go where the police officers are. The after actions say the same things. So this is one of the things that we did. We started this effort about 2 years ago, and we released a film. It's about a 45-minute dramatic film with the last 15 minutes of it is documentary interviews with firefighters, or with police chiefs, police officers who responded to various events, including Aurora and Sandy Hook, and talked about what they learned, lessons learned. And the dramatic film has the after-action details on best practices that we read in all these after-actions, because one of the outside of that community read the after-actions. So what we are trying to do at the federal level is push out best practices and lessons learned. I think one of the things that's most important about that is that we see and we hear over and over and over again, we never thought it was going to happen here. It doesn't happen here. We never thought it was going to happen here. It doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen here. And I'm telling you, it happens. It happens just as likely as a house fire is going to happen, and you can't predict where the house fire is going to occur. It happens. So there were a lot of things that we thought, okay, how can we, at the federal level, push out information in a better way so that everybody gets it. The coming storm is one of them. I'll tell you, we didn't address certain issues in the coming storm, and we're doing a follow-up documentary that I'm working with on a film crew. The film crew who worked on this film, national Emmy award-winning company, awesome director, FBI director, introduced this at the IACP and said, the best training available to law enforcement today. That's what he said about my film, which was really flattering and very nice, but he also gave me the money to do it, so yay, boss. The other thing, here's another example of one of the other many things that we've tried to do at a national level, primarily to save expenses for local law enforcement, for local fire EMS. There astonishingly is no training, no consistent training on how to provide death notices. Law enforcement officers provide death notices all the time, and nobody trains them in how to do it. University of Pennsylvania, or Penn State University, had a plan put together with our victim services people and nobody to fund it. So I said, I'll fund it. So we put the training together. The training's available. It's online. It's free. Again, one more thing. Some of the other kinds of things that have been done. We have these constant problems over doing investigations in prevention efforts and getting information from sensitive sources, schools, hospitals, medical records. HIPAA and FERPA, everybody knows what HIPAA is. FERPA is the same thing, only from an education standpoint. So now we have cards available for law enforcement and hospitals and whoever. The cards are available. She says, walking away from the microphone. The cards are available, and the cards say they're to stop conversations and get action. They This is the law. These are the law enforcement exceptions. So the law is here, but the law enforcement exceptions say release the information. The reason that we've done things like this is, and we've done a lot of things like this, is just the idea that law enforcement and first responders are spending a lot of time and money individually, doing individual things, and that's defeatist, right? I mean, we can do it at a federal level, share it, push it out to everybody, and then nobody has to do it themselves. So we have a lot of these products. They're available for you, they're available for your communities. Reach out to us if you need them. Please hit our site and see what some of the other things are that are available. For instance, down in the right-hand corner, you'll see these little cards. These are cards, the same ones used by the City of Houston, the same ones used by FEMA, and they're for citizens. And we have a presentation available for citizens. This is so that you can explain to citizens what their concerns are and what they should do. These little cards are Run, Hide, Fight cards that say, hey, these are the things to remember for Run, Hide, Fight. We have requests from universities that come by the thousands. We provide the PDF in case companies want to print them up themselves. They're foldable, so you can just put them in that little thing that everybody seems to wear around their neck these days. That's what the universities ask us for, so that's why we do them for the universities this way. And it's just a reminder of what does Run, Hide, Fight mean. I mentioned before the study that we did. It's so well written, don't you think, guys? No, I wrote it. That's why I co-wrote it. That's why I'm teasing them. But the guys are going to, some of these people are going to talk about some of the things that are in the study. But one of the things that I think probably for the FBI we were able to bring to the table and hopefully support is there were just a lot of unknowns when we first started with this whole idea of what is an active shooter and why is it, and is it just a media sensation thing? We heard that a lot, and I realized really, as the FBI, we were really in a position where we could gather all the data, we could do the research on it, and provide some empirical data that really, I think that's what we need more than anything else. We need more research done, we need more studies done, because research-driven, data-driven decision-making is really what you want to do in your departments. You don't want to just randomly say, we're going to do this or we should do that. There's a lot of research and there's a lot of data. There's a lot more to be done. But this is an example. It's happening more in businesses. People are like, oh, it's happening in schools. No, it's a business incident. And so that's part of the problem. But you can see that the education is like the second largest number. So it's definitely happening. If you can't see it on the pie chart, here's the in the schools. Because you deal with schools, you all have kids in schools, and you all know people have kids in schools. One of the most striking things that came out of this study for me is the shooter was from that school. We three of the shooters, current or former employees, 4 of them fired that day. The threat in a business is inside the business already. The threat in a middle school and high school is inside the school already, which makes prevention super important, and it's helping us to learn how we can and what we need to focus on for prevention for our behavioralists who are down in Quantico. This is the citizens presentation that we have available for anybody who wants to use it. We produced it specifically so that you wouldn't have to do it, so that if you need to go out and talk the latest and the greatest info. We are working on prevention. I know my time is going to roll. So we are working on a lot of the prevention issues that are the most urgent, but they're also the most difficult to tackle. So I'm not a super big slide reader, but I can read it if you like. But I'm trusting that you guys know how to read. That's why you're in the business that you're in. But I will tell you this about prevention. There's one thing that we know for sure. I'm not as they say, I'm not a behavioral expert, but I practically live with our behavioral experts, so I feel like I am. Individuals who do this have a real or perceived injustice that they feel. They have been wronged in some way, real or perceived, and they move on a trajectory towards violence. And your goal, our goal, is to intercept that trajectory towards violence. And it's really all the experts would agree that basically they move from an ideation, that's their grievance, they have this idea, but then they go through planning and preparation before the attack occurs. The planning and the preparation are when we can find them. So those are the kind of things that when we look at what are we trying to do to prevent these attacks, which is the most important thing, those are the kind of things that we're looking to research and to add more data in. But also when you're talking about prevention, when you're talking about planning and the process of preparation, those are all visible. We know that 80 to 90% of the time, 80 to 90% of the time, somebody knew specifically or in general that the subject was going to do something because somebody saw something. You know how it is, it's always in hindsight. Oh, I know, he was weird, he did this, he did that. And people don't say anything because they don't want to get anybody in trouble, right? So this idea that getting civilians better prepared and getting ourselves better prepared to be comfortable that somebody has an ideation and they're doing some planning and preparation, that's the time when we can kind of we can kind of off-road them into another direction and prevent a shooting. That's our goal, right? Obviously, our goal is to do that. What kind of things do they do that create? What kind of things do they do that create something that we can see contextually inappropriate conduct? You own guns, but now you suddenly buy more. You shoot, but now you're suddenly shooting more. You give away your personal items. That's a very scary and current sign. You give your things away, right? You isolate yourself. You change your appearance. There's a number of things from a behavioral standpoint that's why we listed them here, but there are many others, and I'd like you to take, if you get a chance, I'd like you to take a look at these just because you could be the one who prevents it, right? It takes a team. Here are the problems that we see right now for citizens. This is what we tell citizens. Dispatch is going to be overwhelmed. You're going to try to get through, but you're not going to be able to get through. There's going to be these physical space concerns. You need to pre-identify. This is what we want businesses to know, civilians to know. You need to pre-identify where police can set up, where fire can set their equipment, where the media can be interviewed, where witnesses can be interviewed. Every company can do that ahead of time. Every school district can do that ahead of time. And that will save a lot of agony. That's what the pre-planning, that's what the emergency planning stuff is that we're talking about. So go through some of these slides if you get a chance. But I just wanted to tell you that we're working on these kinds of things because we have bigger, right? We have bigger fish to fry still. We're working on a lot of ongoing concerns. The time length, as you know, Navy Yard was a tremendous, scary amount of time in Washington, D.C., where I stood in the command post and listened to the audio tape, so we were watching that guy walk around the building and we couldn't find him. Also, the Boston bombing, San Bernardino, right? IEDs. There are other concerns that we have that we just haven't addressed yet. And so as much as we thought we were going to be done a few years ago, we're not done. We have so much more work to do. So one of the and I'll just close with this, one of the biggest things that I think I've realized over the past year is that as much work as the FBI has done on helping to bring police up to date on research and on best resources, the best tools for the trade, getting them to carry and use and be trained in tourniquet use and gauze packing and things that will help to slow the bleeding down before you guys all get there, getting them to make sure that they don't park their stupid cars on the road so you can get your vehicles through, right, which is one of the most common things that I hear all the time. And I see the smiles in the audience because you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. They're the same guys who roll up and stop on your fire hoses, right? So the kind of things that we're doing with police, I think what we haven't been able to do, and we've tried to turn the tide and work on that, is that first responders is not just police, right? We've been very focused on police and getting the police to understand that unified command is part of the part of the job. As much as we've worked on those kind of things for police, what we haven't done is we haven't done as much with fire and EMS to make sure that fire and EMS understand police better, that police understand fire and EMS better, that languages that are the same, that we need to have the same at the scene so that you know what our priorities are. When I put together, and I'll just close with this, when we put together something that we hand out to law enforcement, this is initial on-scene command considerations for law enforcement. This isn't just for law enforcement, right? But when we made it, we did. That's my error. When I made it, I said, when Jerry and I from the San Antonio Police Department sat down and wrote this, we wrote this for police, but really this is for you guys too. This is what do we think is the first things? It has to be what you guys think is the first things, because you're rolling up on the scene too. That's a failure on our part. So we're trying to make sure that we do that. These are law enforcement tactical considerations before they arrive on the scene. What do you have to worry about? These are the same things that you guys have to worry about. Because if you guys get to the scene and you're not worrying about these things, people are shooting at you, right? So that's the kind of things that we want to do in the next year, particularly as we want to make sure that we share with law enforcement, we share what we're shared with law enforcement with fire and EMS, because first responders are first responders. So I'm going to move from there and let Lori move on to the next one, but I hope I've given you some things to think about, and please hit the website or shoot me an email and I'll get you what you need, okay? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Kate. Thank you very much. Great job. So I wanted to let you guys know that we're going to have some time left at the end for some Q&A. So think of your questions as the speakers are on. If you have a particular question, write it down. We've got a mic on the floor, so we'll save some time at the end if those with us here in the room have questions, okay? We'll try to do that. So let's move on to our next speaker. John Delaney is with the Arlington County Fire Department. John's been in the fire service over 24 years, with the last 20 years being with Arlington County, Virginia Fire Department. He currently is the program manager of the fire department's High Threat Response Program, which focuses on building operational capabilities that will be required for these atypical threats, to include active shooter, explosive and fire as a weapon events. These programs focus on the development of multi-agency and integrated police response, just exactly what we're all thinking about. Captain Delaney has participated in multiple large-scale regional and national emergencies, including the response in September 11th, 2001 to the attack on the Pentagon. Today, John is going to describe to you active shooter response preparedness and training and response task force concept, as well as tactical emergency casualty care. So, Captain Delaney, please. Please welcome.
Just this button. I know what all of you are thinking. Is he really standing up, or is he really that short? If we were at my fire department, I'd be getting a bunch of comments. Stand up, Delaney, stand up. I'm also assuming that this is streaming live on Netflix, which gives me a little bit of leeway in my verbal communication. It might not all be, rainbows and flowers coming out. But that's okay. It's a good assumption on my part. I manage our high threat response program. I'm going to talk in detail about that. It's a position that was developed 2.5 years ago. The last year and a half has been in a full-time 40-hour week capacity, and I know what all of you are saying is that sucks, you're off shift work. But it needs to be that way in actuality. Like Lori said, I've been involved for a little more than 24 years, the past 20 of which have been with Arlington County, and I will tell you that this has been my biggest challenge since being in the fire service. I got 23 minutes or so to talk about general preparedness, ongoing training, what Arlington Fire's focus and priorities are, and tactical emergency casualty care. I want to say that if at any time in the future that you are interested, we see our job is to share anything and everything that we have. We have a quick vetting process. We'll send you a form and verify who you are, make sure you're not the bad guy. But any of the stuff that we have, any of the stuff that we've gone over today, we'll be happy to share with you, and my contact information is on the back or at the end of the presentation. Before we jump into those things, we're going to talk about a couple key variables here. The first one is leadership. It's easy building a program, building the capacity to respond to active shooter events is easy if you have a leader that recognizes this and believes in this, okay? It's generally not the case. The leadership has to come from somebody in the ranks, whether it's somebody in the union, not in the union, somebody who's an officer, somebody who's a firefighter. It has to come from somebody, and it could come from multiple people. You have to lead up in many cases, okay? If it was easy, everybody would be doing it. The threat. This threat is facing each and every one of our communities. You are kidding yourself if you don't think that this event could occur in your community. Data and statistics. The fire service, up until recently, hasn't looked to data and statistics. What has it been? It's been tradition, stuff that's been passed down. Why did you do had the captains in the room here? What did the captain before you say? Do it this way. Why? Because, well, you didn't say why, first off. You did it that way because they told you, right? We have to change that. We have to look at data and statistics. National Institutes of Standard and Technology is doing a ton of research in FlowPass, right? Changing the fire service in the past 5 years like it hasn't been changed previously. We have to rely on data and statistics, and that's what we do. We look at data and statistics, and I'll touch on that here shortly. Lastly, participation and commitment, okay? You can't just develop an SOP and say, and put a couple tourniquets on and get some ballistic vests and do a little bit of training. That puts you at the bottom of the hill. That puts you at the bottom of the mountain. We've been doing this since 2008, Arlington Fire, and we're in the middle of this mountain right now. We're constantly learning, we're constantly climbing, okay? It's a program that needs continual development, continual care. So pattern of an active shooter event. We look at data and statistics to scope us. Firemen think the worst case scenario all the time. Not every event is an Aurora. Not every event is a Columbine, okay? The vast majority of the events is a single male, age 20 to 30, opens fire without warning inside a well-populated building during daylight hours. He'll be armed with more than one firearm and will fire 25 rounds. Will initially target specific people, but is very likely to fire randomly before stopping. Will injure between 0 and 5. Will kill between 0 and 5. Will be over in less than 10 minutes. Will likely die, probably by applied force or committing suicide. Oops. Not every event goes on for 2 days. Not every event has multiple shooters. In fact, only 2 to 4% of the events have multiple shooters. Only 2 and 4% of the time are IEDs used in these events. Shit, by the time half of us get there, the event is probably over. If a mom comes out at the curb and says, my baby's in the back, second floor, what are each and every one of you going to do? You're going to grab a ladder, VES, going to grab a hose line. You're going to go in, get the job done. I'm not suggesting because you will do that, you should do this. What I'm saying to you is that the risks in here are far greater, or more unknown than the risks in responding to an active shooter event. You can't see, feel, hear, or see anything. You don't even know if there's a baby in there. Building construction, flow path, heat. Who's your battalion chief? Who's the guy pulling the line? Right? All of these variables, that could impact you. you're risking your life to go into this. And every single one of you will do that. If you have an active shooter event, what I'm telling you is you're going to have unified command, where a police officer and a firefighter are within a handshake's distance. You're going to know where the shooter is, okay? You're going to know that that shooter is contained. You're going to have multiple sets of officers that have gone through that area. You're going to know that you have patients in that area because those cops are going to tell you. We're not sending you in willy-nilly. That's irresponsible, okay? I'm just saying that the risk is far less than what we often assume. High threat response program, warm zone care, the rescue task force kind of concept of what we're talking about today, active shooter response, falls under warm zone care. We are looking at developing and expanding upon fire as a weapon. ISIS propaganda just came out, largely talks about ways to use fire. Response to explosives is a critical issue. We don't have enough coordination going on. Future atypical threats, and we can't forget weapons of mass destruction, all the stuff that we learned way back when. I'm going to touch on a couple points here with general preparedness. Okay, a key thing is that we don't understand what other disciplines do. Again, to be able to respond to an active shooter event, it is our belief that it requires an integrated approach with law enforcement, okay? What we don't know is what law enforcement is all about. So in Arlington, what we've done is we've established a Fire Department 101 class and a PD 101 class. And we give it to each of our firefighters, and we've done it so much now that we give it in recruit school. And we learn about the other disciplines, the command structure, who's in charge, what resources they send. It's a great way to get a better understanding. You learn a lot about the other disciplines. Another key area for us are ongoing training. We do a lot of training in this area. A couple of key ones I want to highlight. No notice drills. We'll do this once a month where we take a fire truck out of the station, have them come and meet up with 4 officers that we call off of the street. They develop an ad hoc group. We give them a quick mission inside a facility within our community, not at the Fire Training Academy where everybody knows every single corner and access. This is actually done at the AMC Theater, 3-story theater in the middle of our county. And we bring them up, we give them a mission, and it takes about a half hour per group. It's a great drill, and it's the guys love it because it's only a half an hour. The other thing is in recruit school, we train TECC and RTF in recruit school right from the get-go. It is a baseline expectation, like throwing ladders or pulling hose. You will respond to an active shooter event, and everybody will participate is the motto. The big thing that I also want to highlight is the last one, tabletops, okay? Events that go on nationally and internationally. We have to learn from these events. We have to tabletop them within our department and within with our law enforcement brothers and sisters, okay? We have to look at these international events. The bad guys learn what works, okay? And they're adapting. We have to continually adapt as well. We do realistic training. This is a $80,000 wireless mannequin that bleeds and does everything. And when you apply a tourniquet, you have to apply it to full effect for it to work. So it's an invaluable tool, and you guys can probably, order one up through some federal grant or something. We support, these are our law enforcement partners, and generally we try to get our folks overseeing the TECC applications of it. You'll notice here on the left we're at a school that's about to be demolished, doing some active shooter rescue task force training where we take our law enforcement officers and get up in formation and practice it. The two big variables for us are with regard to active shooter response, and the way that we do it is through Rescue Task Force. The two big areas that we focus on are backstep firefighters and the silver badges, patrol officers. We train every single one of our firefighters and backstep officers to be able to respond to this event, because time is the critical factor in this. The other critical variable with this is that, quite frankly, is the incident commander, okay? We all know it. We have a wide range of capabilities out there, right? And so we focus on hammering in the capabilities of our incident commanders. We have set up and developed incident command boards specific for active shooter events. And again, we'll be happy to share those with you at any time. But these are our two major focus areas. The one point that I want to make, and it's critical, is incident command is not two effing buses, a parking lot away from one another. It's two people that are in charge within a handshake's distance. Who gets the training? Like I said, with warm zone care, RTF, everybody. With explosive training, it's a bit of a mix. With fire as a weapon, we're looking at developing focused training for a specific response group. Tactical emergency casualty care. We're fortunate in Arlington County. The doc who started this is our medical director, Dr. Reed Smith. We are completely bought into tactical emergency casualty care. Again, it's an extension of TECC, but it's a different standard of care for these active shooter events. And again, looking at the statistics, we base a lot of what we do on these statistics, and TECC is no exception. 0 to 5 injured, 0 to 5 killed. Well, we build our system to be able to handle that type of situation. Here we have 5 of everything in here. Theoretically, we could handle the 0 to 5 injured, 0 to 5 killed, or be able to quickly ramp up. Our ballistic vests, which we have 2 on every rig, has some additional equipment, and we have an RTF bag in every rig in the county as well. But we want to be able to address the typical standard active shooter event, but also be able to quickly scale up if necessary. Okay, I just had that picture of me, like I was out there looking at me and all my hand motions and stuff. I feel like I'm from New York or something. Ballistic vests are touchy, very complicated. We're on our 3rd iteration of ballistic vests. This is constantly changing. I will say that the Northern Virginia fire departments all went to the same style vest and the same identification. And I do want to say that this has to be constantly evaluated. We've gone through 3 sets of gear now and learning each and every time. And I'll be glad to talk more about that with you if you're interested. So why does this fall underneath us? Why are we, the fire service, responsible for this mission to respond to active shooter events? We hear a lot out there. We've never done it. This is not our responsibility. I'm assuming that's not the case because you're in here in this room today. But let's take a look back a little bit. We heard this same stuff previously. Our captains that came before us. In the 1970s, what did we begin to take on? Not just fire. We didn't respond to fire anymore, but EMS, right? We started paramedicine. They hated it back then. Change is tough. In the 1970s and 80s, we developed a hazmat capability. Why us? Why the fire service? They hated it back then. The 1990s, technical rescue. 2000s, weapons of mass destruction. This is the next thing. And you know what? There's going to be more stuff that comes down the road. And that's where we're failing, in my humble opinion. We're not looking to the future like these guys were. Shit, these guys were doing it all back in the 70s. Fighting fire, hazmat, EMS. They were doing it all. Well ahead of us. How much time do I have? 5 minutes, okay. So, in wrapping up here shortly, that my push and our feeling is, let's not wait. The fire service is tragically reactive. How many of us know, by a show of hands, how many explosives or incendiary devices were used in Columbine? There were 99. If you read the after-action report, the main goal, or the original plan, was to blow up 2 20-pound propane tanks in the cafeteria and shoot the students as they rolled out of there. That was supposed to be a fire as a weapon incident. But because it didn't happen that way, we typically don't learn anything from it. Learn as a fire service as a whole. We need to change that. We need to be looking to the future. We need to learn from these events. Far too often, it takes a tragedy for us to change. The Coconut Grove nightclub fire. Our Lady of Angels school fire. 92 children were killed. The Station nightclub fire. We all know that this event can occur in any one of our communities, and it might not be 99 people that are killed, okay? Let's not wait for the tragedy to happen before we do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you, John. How many of you are familiar with the term fire as a weapon? Have you heard that before? A few of you. That is something, and I'm glad John brought that up, because it is something that we do have to prepare for. So that's certainly outside our subject matter today, but then again, it isn't. So Mumbai, if you remember the Mumbai attacks, it was not only active shooter, but it was fire also. And so the fire as a weapon is a very real threat as well. All right, let's move on to our next speaker, Ryan Starling. Ryan Starling worked for the San Bernardino City Fire Department for 11 years, then transitioned over to San Bernardino County Fire, where he currently works as an engineer paramedic. Along with being a firefighter, he is also a tactical medic with the SWAT team with San Bernardino City Police Department. Ryan has received multiple letters of accommodation for his actions with the department, including the Life Saving Award and the Medal of Valor for his actions on December 2nd, 2015. Ryan, interesting facts about him, he has triplets, 8-year-old triplets, so God bless you for that. He also is a baseball player, so he went to college on a full baseball scholarship, so quite a fellow. So Ryan is going to come and talk with us today about being, he was first through the door in the San Bernardino shooting, about the event, the lessons learned from that response, and to the Inland Regional Center mass shooting on December 2nd, 2015, where 14 people were killed and 22 seriously injured. So, Ryan, please welcome Ryan.
Well, thank you for having me. Again, engineer Ryan Starling. Hopefully my chief's watching, captain here soon in the next test coming up. So just throwing that out there. That day, I just got off a 72. We did work for San Bernardino City Fire Department with the whole bankruptcy. Everybody's aware of San Bernardino, probably been watching it. We transitioned over to county. One of the greatest things that's probably happened to me was going over to county. It's been a true blessing. So thank you, County Fire, and thank you all you guys for coming and supporting. That day I got off of 72 in the morning. We had SWAT training that day, and I just remembered being extremely tired, exhausted, not wanting to go, and something just kind of told me, hey, you need to go to training today. I was the only tactical medic, so I always had that thing, what if something happens at training, what if something happens during that day, anything. So there was those little hairs that we always talk about on the back of your neck. Went to training that day. We changed our training. We were doing standard entries to active shooter because of the recent terror attacks in overseas. So we started with active shooter training. The first 2 we did 2 scenarios, and we were reviewing the second scenario when the dispatch came out for the report. So we were actually doing active shooter training that day, practicing, so it was fresh in our minds. So that kind of gives you a kind of a synopsis of what kind of happened, and you'll go through the slides. This is about an hour presentation, hour and a half presentation. I'm going to get it here in about 23 minutes, so bear with me. So our objectives, you guys can read through those. Here's the 14 victims. This is why we're here today. Each event we have victims from these events, and we learn from them. Their lives are for a reason, or their life's loss is not for any reason. We're doing this for them. So when this happens again, we save one life, we've done our job, okay? They gave the ultimate sacrifice, and we're continuing to learn every day because of them. So I commend to their families and everything for their loss that they've had to endure. I can't even imagine. So the Waterman incident. Basically, we had 2 terrorists come in. He was a county employee, worked at the county. Came in that morning, had an IED with him in a backpack, which I'll explain here in a little bit. Had a issue with one of the employees over religion. This has happened multiple times that we were told by witnesses. He left approximately about 10:30, went and got his wife, came back to the thing, tried to, we believe, we don't know, but tried to possibly detonate the IED. Didn't happen, went to plan B, went in and started shooting up the county building. So a little history on San Bernardino. Low poverty town, there's 213,000. Unemployment rate's 11.4, which is extremely high. The annual income in the town is only 37,000. It's a lower income town. That was part of this, what led to the bankruptcy. There's also a high crime rate that follows that. So the crime rate, as you can see in the purple, San Bernardino has a huge, huge crime rate. I think we're over 60 homicides for the year already in a town of only 200,000. We're beating out Detroit now, based per capita. So I'm going to go over a couple dispatch tapes real quick so you guys can hear the initial kind of dispatches, and then I'll talk about them.
911 Operator 7.
There's reported gunshots at Inland Regional Center, 1365 South Waterman Avenue.
Listen, you heard it or you saw it?
We heard.
Okay, has anybody been shot?
We have no idea. We're all in
Okay,
different
all
buildings.
right, ma'am. How many gunshots did you hear?
About 5.
Information for units holding shots heard in the area 1365 South Waterman, 1365 South Waterman. We're getting further calls. Call number 6127. Units, it's now shots fired. 1 Ida 10 with
So this was
1
the initial
10 start down
dispatch
that way.
around
Inland Center,
10:55,
correction, the Inland Regional Center,
10:57.
1365 South Waterman. Call number 6127.
The SWAT team are in the air, and if they copy the search.
So they know it's
Yeah,
Wednesday that
can you give us
the
X-ray unit station one?
SWAT team's training, so that's the lieutenant that's getting on and letting them, hey, get the SWAT team on the air because they know that the priority of this incident.
It's in building number 3, possible active shooter. 1 suspect.
Wagon 6 will be en route.
Copy, 1 suspect.
That's
so
our
far,
lieutenant
black
here in the
male.
dispatch
Sorry,
going,
correction,
hey,
male
we're en
in
route.
black clothing. He's still firing rounds.
So I'll skip this one. This is the same thing. Basically what the dispatch is the first lieutenant that gets on scene. He's given the report. He was actually going down south to get food, which is about a mile south of that, and he was responding back. So he was a lieutenant, one of the lieutenants that sits behind a desk all the time, and he was one of the first that were on scene when, and he kind of talks about that, but he calls for the SWAT team right away multiple times. Hey, where's your ETA? Where are you at? It's very rare that you're gonna have a SWAT team already dressed, ready, and deployed, and that's what we were. We had all our gear ready. We had our simunition, rifles, so all we had to do was switch out our uppers and respond. So we were responding with our comms, everything within about 30, 40 seconds. So it was fortunate that we were training that day. Here's kind of a timeline of what went through as far as the fire department response. Initial dispatch, once the dispatch occurred, everybody was kind of listening to the radio. They started self-dispatching. We had 10 engines there, 2 trucks, 1 battalion chief. There was 2 other battalion chiefs, but they were in a neighboring city doing terrorism training, so they were delayed. The chief was at city council because of the bankruptcy stuff, working on the transition, working on how he's going to cut the fire department, basically, in other words, at that time. But here's the basic synopsis. Here is another one from the fire department side.
Medic engine 222, medic engine 225, medic truck 224, medic engine 226, medic engine 227, medic engine 228, medic engine 232, medic engine 229, medic engine 241, with units en route and staging for a multiple shooting victim, 1365.
En route, all units en route are on scene at level 2 stage.
That's our battalion chief, letting me know the level 2 stage.
We'll be at Orange Show and Waterman, just north of the incident. Copy. All units that have already been pre-designated. All units that have already been pre-designated respond to the scene and assume your command position.
That was a huge thing, pre-designated assignments. So when the chief responded in, he is one of our really proactive chiefs, did a really good job, Grant Hubble, set it up. We're pre-designated staging. What he did is he drove into the command post. He was just north of where the police command post was. We had one of our former fire explorers that became a cop. He went the other route instead of the right route, but it's all right. Really good guy. Pulled up right next to him. So he had unified command with him. He had all the police radios. He's got this bank of radios because he's a school officer that also does terrorism. He's an all-risk, basically, officer. Pulled up right next to him and was able to communicate. So he had all the radios going, was able to relay to our battalion chief what law enforcement was doing. So he was basically had hand-to-hand touch, like we talk about, unified command. Once it got set up that they determined where the triage area was going to be set up, he actually got out of his vehicle, jumped in the battalion chief's vehicle, and drove him into the tactical command post right next to the officer, so they were face to face. So that was a huge part of our thing, is unified command. We had unified command right away because of the prior incidents from all these other incidents that we had. We knew that was the most important, and that was able to allow us to set up our triage area in the location that I'll show you here that was pivotal for what happened. Also was the pre-designated assignments. Everybody en route knew what their job was. Our battalion chief knew, okay, medic engine 221, 222, who's going to be on scene first? So he started pre-designated assignments. 231, you're going to be medcom. 221, you're going to be treatment unit leader. So now these medics and captains in the back, they're already getting a mindset of what my job is. So you got a 30-second, just like a football game. We don't go into a football game without a plan, right? We have a game plan. Yeah, we might have to tweak it, but at least we have a plan, so we're heads up. That was a huge, huge advantage when you talk to anybody on the incident. They already knew what they were doing, so they got off the rig with their stuff already ready to go. That's time. Time is tissue. So my response, we're at our local training center that we train a lot for fire and police. 22-minute ETA for us down there. I got there in 9 minutes. Okay, I didn't break any rules. I drove per my department policy. Well, I was in the passenger seat, so it was one of the wildest rides I've ever had. I'll tell you that. But we'd followed all department policies to get there in 9 minutes. I'll just put it that way. Here's the incident, or the location. So there's 3 separate addresses. The shooting occurred, the far incident, as you can see, the south building. Here's an aerial shot, one of the first shots that was taken overhead by a helicopter. You can see laser. Oop. Oh, I probably messed that up. There we go. Is it the laser right here? Okay, if you can see, down there on the bottom where the fire trucks are, that was where we set up our triage location. You go north on that the Park Center, they went into the back side of the building on the bottom there. So here's an aerial shot. So if you look at the building, the far building on the left, the back part of it, when they circle around there, they circle around there on the back, they came in through those back doors. The witnesses described it. Initially there was 2 victims that they shot outside the building. The people inside described it as balloons popping. They had no idea that shooting was going on. So there's the building. You can see where the treatment and staging area was set up. And this was pivotal because our local hospitals are south of this, all of our trauma centers. So these law enforcement officers, when they started loading them up into vehicles, pickup trucks, our Bearcat, they had to drive right into our triage location. So they had to run into us, allowed them to drop them off to us. Even with that, there was still one officer that loaded a patient up in his vehicle. He was so tunnel vision, They don't deal with this stuff all the time. Now they're out of their realm. They're dealing with EMS also. They're used to dealing with just law enforcement stuff. So they get tunnel vision, their heart rate increases. Just like if we were at a shooting, we're not used to dealing with that stuff. It's out of our norm, our heart rate's gonna increase. So they get very tunnel vision. As your heart rate increases, it becomes like this. He drove through about 10 fire trucks, made a left, drove about 13, 14 ambulances past them, and still drove a patient to the hospital. Because that's what was in his head. I got to get a patient to the hospital. I know Loma Linda's here. He reverted back to his original thoughts, his original training, and that's what's going to happen on these incidents. So if we know the mindset and the philosophy of human nature. We want to help. We're public safety. Fire, police, EMS, we all want to help. So we're going to do whatever we think is right to help. Okay? So we can set up triage areas, casualty collection points in areas where the egress is out for law enforcement. We know they're going to run into us. They have to drop the patients off to us. We had 2 patients that, I'll go over here in just a second, actually. So there's determined the warm zone because there was an IED inside. It was 3 pipe bombs taped to a car that was set to detonate off a radio control car. So as soon as you turned it on, turned the receiver, clicked it, it was supposed to detonate wired to the servo or the radio controller. Fortunately, it didn't detonate. They tried multiple times, which you'll hear and see in a second. So we designated the warm zone. We were right on the border of the warm zone, there for the triage, and then the cold zone. So we set up the casualty collection point. You'll see the room inside. Most of the victims, there was 3 or 4 victims outside that had crawled out, and there was about 20 to 25 victims inside the room. And we set up the casualty collection point right here on the outside of the thing. We had the law enforcement, probation did a phenomenal job. All the law enforcement, they immediately started treating patients and getting them out. They started bleeding control, and my role was we went in through the front door when we got there. We cleared the first floor, went room to room. We had to breach a couple doors and made sure there was no shooters on that first floor. My team went to the stairwell and proceeded up to the second floor. That's when I branched off because I knew the first floor was clear, and I branched off and started triaging all the patients. So I had to go systematically through about 35 patients to triage them to get the appropriate patients out to fire and EMS. And I'm listening to both the radios at the time to figure out where the triage location was, where our tactical commander set it up, and our battalion chief. So basically my job was just to triage the patients, and the law enforcement dragged them all out to the casualty collection point, started loading them up in pickup trucks, which they were heads up probation. We used 4 vehicles to get 19 patients out. So we threw them in the back of pickup trucks. We used one police car, 2 pickup trucks, and a Bearcat. So in the pickup trucks, we had about 13 people. There was about 7 of them laid in, and then the next one had about 6 of them laid in. And the Bearcat, we threw about 3 or 4 of the last remaining victims in there. So they would drive up and drive around right there where the white part is, load them up, and then drive them straight out to the treatment area where they had the triage area all set up. Here's the initial room. So those accordions, those are, one of them was closed and the other one was open. So it's basically like a big dais conference room. To the far right is kind of like a round table that you'd see in a conference chamber. They came in through these middle doors here in the middle and engaged in gunfire and started shooting victims. They focused their fire on the victims that were running out, trying to get out to the hallway. And then they focused their fire on the victims trying to get out to the rest of the door. Basically just spraying and praying per what the witnesses were saying. They had some focused fire and then just shooting randomly anybody that would move. They would walk through and they were kicking people. Anybody that moaned, they would shoot them again. I mean, they wanted to hurt as many people as possible. They got up on the table, shot through the tables. It was a horrific, horrific event. Here's the initial front door where they went through, which we also went through. Here's the inside pictures of the room. There was a bullet that actually struck it went up into the plenum space and struck one of the sprinkler pipes. So there was water flowing the whole way. So as we walked through, there was a puddle of water and it flowed for about 9 hours till we got it shut off because it's on a loop system and you had to shut off about 4 of them. Normally you can shut off one, shut off the other, it shuts off the sprinkler system. Well, there wasn't. We found one last one covered in bushes about 9 o'clock later that night. That was the casualty collection point, so we're dragging them right out the front door to this location, and we'd load them up in the pickup trucks from there. So this was it's kind of superimposed. This was the remnants after the IED was exploded by the bomb squad. It was in a county backpack, so you'd never know. It said San Bernardino County on it. There was about 15 of them in the room. And this was the car not the car, but one that was superimposed, 3 pipe bombs taped to it, wrapped around, wired to that servo, right in the middle of the table. So a room about this size. So we walked by it multiple times, getting these victims. And you'll see they drove around trying to detonate it around us, circling. Here's the staffing that we talked about that day. We also had engines from the surrounding agencies, about 4 other agencies that responded. We had a total of, I think, 15 engines on scene. We had about a ratio of 2 guys to 1. And all we did from the fire department stance was set up the triage area, and law enforcement brought them out to us from the casualty collection point. So they did their job. They did the initial rescuing, and we did our job with the triage in the area. We had 2 people code en route that we got back and went home. Everybody that was alive that day when we arrived on scene is still alive that day and was discharged by Christmas. We had MedCom that was set up. MedCom is our radio communication. We call the hospitals and let them know, hey, we have an MCI, declare it, and they get us bed availability. So we had that set up prior to even being on scene. We had a 4-month employee. Another engineer that worked for us told him, hey, get on MedCom. So we called them right away. So before we were even on scene, we had our bed availability before we even arrived on scene. That was another thing to get the hospitals heads up right away, and they had it all set up. And I apologize, I'm going through this really fast so I don't lose anything. So we had 33 gunshot victims, 19 that were treated. Yet others, a couple people ran, tripped and fell, degloved themselves because they were so panicked and ran and fell. We had 22 transported by ambulance, 2 by air rescue, with that police officer that transported the 1 victim. So if you look at this is one of my favorite slides. You look at all the patients. We have all the data, where they went, and you look at the right side, all of them discharged. Pretty incredible. Every patient was to a surgeon within 57 minutes. So we talk about that golden hour. Talk about time. No matter what we do, how we do it, rescue task force, using law enforcement to rescue, integrated in with a tactical medic, however we do it, we just got to remember time. Get them to a surgeon. We don't save lives, we prevent death. The paramedics in the back of the ambulance, same thing, prevent death. The ER doc prevents death. The one that's going to save their life ultimately is going to be that surgeon. So however we can get them to that surgeon as fast as possible, whatever agency you work for, that's what you need to accomplish. So here's the local hospital, so you can see that they were all close. The trauma centers are all Riverside County, and then there's another one. They're all south of the incident. So they knew that those trauma centers are all south of the incident, so that's why we kind of set up our triage area location there. Again, got all the patients, once they got to the triage, every single critical patient was off scene within 15 minutes once they got to triage, excuse me. And all of them 57 minutes to a trauma center. So if you look at this, look at the staging location. See Orange Show and Waterman. That's going to be really crucial once I show you a slide of where the suspects went and they drove around. We had the initial thing, the tactical command posts, and then just south where we had another treatment staging area, because that was one of our fire stations, was exactly about a half a mile south of that incident. If you look at our fire engines, we were right in front of the building. We had good intel, and that's why they put us there, that the shooters have already fled in a black SUV. There was possibly one shooter, possibly outstanding. There was kind of false information. But the one thing that we did learn is use our fire engines to protect ourselves. Those are big-ass bulletproof trucks. I mean, it's going to take a large round to get through that. If we would have pulled them up another 6 feet, we would have been protected the whole time. So if some stray bullet or random bullet or a sniper on the roof or something, we would have been protected. That's a lesson we learned. We can use our fire engines to protect ourselves, to allow us to get a little bit closer for our treatment areas. So here's a great slide that the FBI did. See the little dot on that's the initial incident. So this is about a 4-hour time block from the initial incident. Watch where they go. Down over here, there's a small square, and that's their apartment where they lived. This is all the way till the initial shootout. So they drove around for a while, coming back. They went up to a lake up there. They dumped some stuff in the lake. They went right back to Orange Show, right where our staging location was. They were right around us the whole time, driving around. Goes to think that we're so focused, we're so tunnel visioned on the initial incident. They started having false alarm calls to Amazon warehouse, 2 million square foot building of an active shooter. And this is where they end up at the shootout that we had with them. We're so focused on the initial incident, we don't even know they're around us and they're driving around. They could have, if they would have used a large a better RC thing, like a drone, longer frequency, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you because it would have detonated. They could have drove right into that tactical man post, could have had bombs in their vehicle, and started a second incident within an incident. So it's just heads up, we need to be aware of everything that's around us. The triage location, again, I talked about the vehicles. You can see the building, they just pulled them up. Have been a little bit closer. Force protection. There's this whole rescue task force that we talk about and everything. We had 3 from a neighboring agency. When we were with San Bernardino City, we didn't have rescue task force at the time. We trained on having law enforcement. With our active shooter response for our San Bernardino PD, and what they're kind of going to is we send in contact team. Once we have enough contact teams, they start sending in rescue teams. So law enforcement is actually doing the rescue, basic first aid, and dragging them out to the warm zone, to the casualty collection point. Currently with our department, we do rescue task force. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's a great tool to have. It's not the ultimate tool for every scenario. Just like for our structure fires, we don't just have one policy for a structure fire. We have LCOs, we have high rises, we have Victorians, every incident we have different policies, so we can't just have one policy. So it's a good tool in the toolbox. I want the biggest toolbox I can possibly. I want the garage that's perfect with all these tools. That way I can pull out the tool that I need, get the job done as fast as possible. So we talk about force protection. We had about 3 rescue task force that were deployed, that they've done multiple trainings with these 4 deputies that were assigned to these 4 things. And as soon as the shootout occurred, those deputies heard that there was an officer down. What'd those deputies do? They left them. So now we have 12 firemen with no force protection down in the south end. As a strike team, they have no force protection. They're useless because those officers heard one of their officers go down and they wanted to go help. That's what can happen inside too. That's why we need to work on that training. It's getting there. It's close, but that's a key part of it. Real quick, and I'll close up the shootout. After the incident occurred, they went to the house. We got good intel. Somebody called in that a black SUV that you saw was dumping stuff into a lake. They kind of thought it was weird. They got the license plate number. A heads up girl in dispatch for the PD and does all the narc stuff. Looked up the plate, ran the plate, found out ran to a county employee that it was a rental vehicle. So they had good intel. They went to the house, they staked out the house. They were there within an hour and 10 minutes of the initial incident. So they basically started following. Redlands PD officer saw the black SUV, got behind it, and then basically the shootout occurred, and they started driving through town, as you could see, ending up heading back over to the initial incident where it occurred. So this was the initial incident, and that's where it ended up where the shootout happened. You can see all the units that responded. It was every officer from everywhere. 360 some odd rounds were fired between suspects and the law enforcement. You can see them gathered up these initial shots when shots were fired from all over. I mean, I forget, 23 some odd officers that fired. We ended up using 3 Bearcats in the initial thing to quarantine off because she was still in the car, the suspect, and he tried to get out and flank another officer when he was ultimately killed in the street. So we brought in it's called the Roke. It's basically a Bobcat with a armored shield on the front because she was in the vehicle. They call it a rake, but it's a rubbish hook. Law enforcement, I don't know why they have to change the names and stuff because they don't want to be like firemen. They spray paint it black, they charge like triple the price, and they call it a rake. And so we used a rubber hook to actually pull her out of the vehicle because of the possible IEDs that were still in the vehicle. The initial thing, we were covering that suspect there. I'm just going through this real quick so we can have question and answer, and I'm almost done. You can see the multiple vehicles or multiple shots that were fired in the vehicle. Initial, him took off running where he ultimately was killed. The vehicle, her as she was pulled out of the vehicle. I mean, the vehicle just took multiple rounds. This was, you can see down at the bottom, one of the bullets from the suspects that shot one of the police cars and then right through the windshield. Just missed him. Very, very close. We got really lucky on this. That was her arsenal that she had. They had training. They had drop bags. They had mags. Yeah, they weren't done right because they're reversed. But they had some knowledge of some stuff. This was recovered at their house. A whole another bag of pipe bombs. Whether it was deemed for us, other incidents, we don't know. The weapons that they use, I mean, 1911, AR-15s, all legally bought. but modified. And XD40, stovepiped, you can kind of see it was in there. One of the rounds, I think, hit his hand and he kind of limp wristed it. Pre-done mag or bullets, 10 round triple clips, already ready to go. And that's it. So the lessons learned, we talked about setting up unified command immediately. The inappropriate communication, set up triage so that it's in a location where the police department or fire department, we have to run into that location. If it would have been north of the incident, all those officers would have just driven them all the way to the hospital. We don't want to inundate the hospitals with that. The nurses and doctors aren't set up to do triage. They can do it, but we're better at it. Let us do our job. We had 2 patients that we needle teed in the field and that are still alive today that we saved. Let us do our job. That's why we're in place. That's why we're the professionals. We've been doing it for years. We work together as a team, a cohesive team. Everybody does their job. We will be successful. Perimeter control. We need perimeter control. We need them to be able to protect us. And then the last one, the biggest thing is time. Time. That golden hour. It's been around. It's been studied forever. Let's get the patients to the hospital. However we do it, whatever county you work for, city, agency you work for, you just set up and communicate. Get them to the hospital as fast as possible, and they will have the best survivability rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Very good job. Okay, our final speaker, before we get to some Q&A from you, is the chief of the Orlando Fire Department, Roderick Williams. And Chief Williams, in his role as the chief of Orlando Fire Department, he often provides counsel and administrative leadership to and for the mayor and the chief administrative officer in all matters of public safety pertaining to the development and maintenance of the city's fire protection. So to talk with us today, Chief Williams is going to be discussing the event and the lessons learned in response to the Pulse nightclub mass shooting on June 12th, 2016 that killed 49 people and 53 wounded. Chief Williams, if you will, please. Please welcome Chief Williams.
Good morning. As the last, Ryan, right? Yeah. I had to actually cut my presentation down from an hour and a half down to 30 minutes, so bear with me. About 22 minutes, I believe, 23 minutes, so okay. Again, this event occurred June 12, 2012, we all know, and is one of the largest mass shootings in the history of America. So as Ryan was speaking, a lot of things came to me. I was thinking about the difference in time of day, and we'll go through that, and just what resources you can gather in the middle of the day versus in the middle of the night. So it's definitely a stark difference. Oh, right on top. Again, we trained for the Pulse incident. I think it's out of order. Yeah, right to it, yeah. We trained, yeah, I'm sorry, here we go. All right. There we go, thank you. Pre-Pulse training. We had an incident in 2005 where a gateway shooting where we had a disgruntled employee that actually come into at work, as was talked about earlier, and actually shot one employee and killed 5 others. Killed one and injured 5 others. And that shooting in 2005 was instrumental as far as training our personnel in safe training and mass shooting. So as a result, we started working with Orange County Sheriff as well as our own Orlando Police Department as far as training our personnel, as far as entering those warm zones to extract those patients and bring them out. Since then, we did multiple training over the years, and we're right about now, at that time, we had about 92% of our department trained, because, people are off of vacation and stuff. So we got majority of the department trained pre-Pulse, when the Pulse happened. So in June 12, 2012, when Pulse happened, I'm going to set the stage for you. It was in the middle of the night, 2 o'clock in the morning, as Ryan stated earlier. In the daytime, when you can gather all the resources quick, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, when the club lets out, you have almost 300 patrons in the club. We have a 1957 construction building, about 4,800 square feet, and you have people letting out in the club or in a club at a time. We just had Engine 5, and the next slide was just there at the club 30 minutes prior for a medical call. So 30 minutes prior for the shooting occurred, we had crews there treating the patient, transporting them. And if you see the street right here on the side, this is kind of where the engine normally stages and go inside the club and bring the patrons out. So looking at the Pulse nightclub, I just want to give you a little landmarks. This is Pulse Nightclub here on the left-hand side. Station 5 is about 1 block away, 150 meters, and we have the only level 1 trauma hospital in the city is about 6 blocks away. So you're talking about a perfect storm, that silver lining. So for that many trauma patients, that type of emergencies, we have the hospital less than 6 blocks away. And that will lend to what happened as far as transport from PD and stuff of that nature. So fire station is here, the club is there, and the hospital is right there 6 blocks away. You can walk there in minutes. Pre-incident, about 2 a.m., the perpetrator who parked his vehicle on the north side of the building, behind the back door, walked inside the club. About 2:02, we had one off-duty officer working in the club that evening. Normally, that's normal practice. He began, as a suspect entered the club, he began shooting. If you look around the spot, it has various spots you can hide and stuff of that nature. So once the suspect began shooting, we had, like anything else, people scattered. We had multiple calls, dispatcher overwhelmed with 911 calls, people calling for help. On-duty, off-duty officer engaged the suspect inside the club, returned fire. Officer retreated outside the club. At this point now, we have an active shooter situation going on. I got an audio here. I want you to hear the first initial dispatch from the officer at Station 5 when the incident occurred. I get this right.
Go ahead, 5. Stage at Gore and Orange has got massive shots and multiple people firing. We are not leaving the safety of the station.
Okay, are you advising you're with a patient, but you're not able to leave?
Negative. We've got multiple shooting going on outside. People are running everywhere at Orange and Kaylee. We're seeking shelter inside the station. There's multiple shootings going on. Hold the units up at Gore and Orange.
Check. We can't get down past there with it being closed anyway, so we'll stage. We're going to come across division, and we'll stage there.
Just to set the scenario, so you heard the initial dispatch, the initial response from the lieutenant inside the station. He never did say Pulse Nightclub. He just knew he had shooting outside of the station, and he looked out the window outside the south side of the station at Kaylee Street, looking towards the club. He just saw people running down the street. He heard shots being fired, so he didn't know who was friend or foe at that point. So our response to him was to hunker down, defend in place, and wait till he was seen and secured by law enforcement. That's exactly what he did. He did the right thing. Never once in his transmission did he say Pulse Nightclub, nor did dispatch. We just knew we had shots fired in the area, and all he did when he looked out the window, he saw people running down the road. Then all of a sudden you hear banging at the station. Didn't know what was going on at this point. At this point, he has to think about the safety of the crew, the safety of the people he's trying to protect every day. So at the same time, we had a Rescue 7 coming from ORMC, leaving out. I'll let you hear this next transmission. We're the first arriving district, and the rescue leaving the station and it's encountering the groves and the people running down the road at the same time.
You have engine 5, engine 1, engine 101, tower 1. Rural Metro 165, Rescue 1, Rescue 2, Rescue 11, yourself in District 2.
District 1 copies.
Squad 1 staged with other units.
Squad. Orlando District 1, we have several patients that are attempting to leave the scene. There's a separate patient at the 7-Eleven, 1823 South Orange Avenue. The gunshot wound to the abdomen.
Rescue 7, District 1. We're at Orange and Kaylee. Do you need us to respond? Place to Rescue 11. All units stand by. Orlando, if you would, landline ORMC and let them know what's going on. They're probably going to have a lot of walking wounded that are going to arrive right on their front door. Rescue 7, go ahead and add yourself. Orlando, total rescue count 5. We're adding Rescue 7.
Check. Orlando Rescue 7, also be advised, Engine 5 is on lockdown at the station. They have active shooting in the area. Don't proceed under that scene.
Copy, word. Show us in the area, I'll see.
Rescue 7.
District 1 to Rescue 7, we're all staged at Orange and Gore. Just make sure you're not in that area where the active shooting is occurring, which is right there at Kaylee. Copy. District 1, we ended up just inadvertently driving here. We're with OPD. They're covering us right now. We're in a safe area. Check.
So as you notice, the first initial arriving unit staged at Orange and Gore, which you do not see on this map, which is actually a half a mile to a mile up the street, about a half a mile up the street with initial staging, because it's still at no point where they said post nightclub where the shooting occurred. We just had people running down the road. We had a rescue right on top of the situation who just left the hospital, and now they at Kaylee and Orange, less than a block from the post nightclub and right next to the station. So as events begin to unfold, I keep reminding what Ryan said, in a perfect situation in the daytime, but at nighttime, 2 o'clock in the morning, you got organized chaos. I like to say not organized, but chaos. It's almost a war zone where you got victims being carried, victims running down the street. You have, it just went on. And then you had at Einstein Bagel, we had 2 victims already laying there, right there. So at that point, command post was established 3 blocks from the actual shooting took place at Lake Beauty. As more intel came in, they made a determination this is the best place to do the triage and began rapid triage. Unified command, and we talked about unified command. OPD arrived on the scene, and we have a staging area right here at Lake Beauty and right by the subway, the triage 1 and 2. And from there, we began to treat patients. So over the next 42 minutes, over the next 42 minutes, 38 patients was processed through the level 1 trauma center. Now, keep in mind the number of patients that was actually walking down the road as well. You saw the videos. There was so much going on, and we had over 25 apparatuses, transport units. We had about 13 transport units. We had over 70 personnel at that time in that area, and you had law enforcement from between FBI, Sheriff Office, OPD, it was a lot of people in a lot of area in the cover of darkness. And now, now we went from an active shooter to what we call, it was a hostage situation. Joint response. Let me slide through that a little bit, for the sake of time. So as the scene unfolded, we had a unified command system going on right at the corner. But I would tell you right now, if you look, as the scene unfolded, it went from a active shooter to an EOD response to a hostage situation. Law enforcement made a determination that it was more advantageous for them to move south of the original staging location until south of the club for tactical reasons. At that point, we had crews standing around waiting to get deployed. What was happening? We're still treating multiple patients at the time. Additional transport units, we were calling, we had it. It was people waiting and transporting, treating in darkness. It was a chaotic scene at best. And around 3 a.m., the command post moves. Law enforcement went from Kaylee, the Kaylee area, Lake Beauty to Esther Street, right across from Dunkin' Donuts. I'm not sure why they went across from Dunkin' Donuts, but that was the most advantageous spot for the law enforcement to get to. So they went, but a couple things happened along the way, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We had multiple chief officers on the scene. The highest ranking chief officer made a determination at that point as far as a unified command. We talk about unified command. Law enforcement shows up, the mobile bus. We show up. We all in the same vicinity treating, managing the scene. At that point, law enforcement made a determination. It's time for us to move south for us. Our commando on scene made a determination it was more advantageous for the fire department to stay in place because the 2 treatment triage areas, what was going on, that he felt it was better for them to stay in this one area. But what happens when that happens? Communication goes with it, correct? So the communication began to break down. So what the officer did, the commanding officer at the sign said, well, I'm gonna stay in my location, but I'm gonna commandeer a police officer to stand by my side, stand with us near the command post and relay information from us to PD, and so we can get an idea what's going on. But again, we went from an active shooter within minutes to a hostage situation, right? And then as that events began to unfold, more and more things began to happen. So communication somewhat began to break down, even though our personnel was doing what they needed to do to manage the patients, to manage the scene. But if you really want to know what's going on the scene inside of a club where you got hostage bodies all over the place, we need to be where? In the command booth, correct? Everybody agree with that? So during the course of this, we had multiple patients, it was so much going on. They had a cold silver call come in at the hospital, and the hospital was saying now, somebody says the shooter was down at the hospital now. We had no idea how many shooters at the time. We just knew it was a lot of bodies and a lot of hurt people. So the hospital went to immediate lockdown for about 2 minutes, realized it was false. It was just people excited, just people upset. Of course, you see that. But it did not stop the treatment of those patients that was coming to the hospital. Law enforcement has since moved. We have 2 triage sections. We got triage 1, triage 2, and OFD command post is here. And the unified, when I say unified, I use that term loosely because we were not there. Command post was south of the club, but we had other law enforcement agents, FBI, ATF. Everybody was in that command booth, and we were there 2 blocks, well, about a block, 2 blocks away, about a block away. Around 3:40 a.m., we got good intel that it's a potential explosive. In the city, we have EOD response, our firefighters that are dual certified. They are law enforcement as well as arson and bomb members. So they work with law enforcement as well as the sheriff office to mitigate any EOD response in the city. So those individuals came on scene. We had intel that the perpetrator, the suspect, had explosive ordnance in his vehicle as well as on him. So now we have 2 separate we have an EOD response going on, and once that call went out, now our staging goes back a little further, as far as about a 3-block radius. So we had that going on, still had a hostage situation, so it was an active shooter. So we went from an active shooter to a hostage situation. Now we have a hostage/EOD scene going on. Now we are looking at what is going on. It's still 3 o'clock in the morning. It's dark. It's chaos. It's a war zone, if you will. But our crews did a phenomenal job for what they had in front of them. So I give them a lot of praise and a lot of credit for what was going on. So we staged. Scenes kept unfolding. Things kept happening. Did not stop the efforts. So around 5 a.m., SWAT team entered a Pulse nightclub. At this point, it was determined that, okay, we can't wait any longer. We had confirmed intel that we had multiple patients that was dead already. And just to paint the picture about that, Ryan showed the AR-15, 6R AR-15, what the suspect had, as well as a handgun. All right, you had over 49 people dead in the club, and how do you know he was dead? From assessment, from headshots to body shots that was exhibited when law enforcement made entry into the club. So at about 5 a.m., they made a determination, let's enter the club. SWAT they engaged the suspect. We were standing by, we was ready. At this point, crews has recharged. We were waiting for the rest of the victims. We had intel that we had between 12, 15 victims that was hostage still inside the club. SWAT made entry, engaged suspect went down. Fortunately, and we had one officer also get hit in the helmet. When they engaged the suspect had both guns in hand, took the suspect down. One officer got caught in a Kelvar helmet with the 9mm, which luckily was a 9 instead of AR-15 because he would have been dead. Officer went down, got back up, returned fire. As a result, they got the suspect down. So at 5:17, once that happened, all those victims come out of the club, we began immediate treatment. But one thing was missing in the whole thing, the whole scenario. It was when they made their explosive breach between 5 and 5:02 a.m., we had no idea the breach was happening. Because what we had was an officer at the command booth, at the command post, OFD command post. When SWAT made a determination, this is how we going inside the club to stop this suspect. Once they made that, that's on 2 different radio channels. It's not on your standard emergency channel with law enforcement. It's on a secret channel, encrypted and channel with law enforcement. So when that happened, when explosive breach happened, the first thing, what most people do, you startled. You startled by that. It was a quick startle. Radio transmission came across, realized what was happening, and we went in. The patient started running out of the back of the club. But what we learned was communication. We had no real communication what was going on, and not having a person in the command booth at the time did not allow us to really understand what was happening at the time. So fortunate for us, fortunate for that scene, it did not hamper operations. Crews did a phenomenal job, and they did their job, and they did it effectively. Suspect was down, but once the suspect was down, we still had an EOD response. It was still a situation going on. Even though the suspect was down, we still had great intel. He had hits on his car, which is outside the club, as well as inside him as well. So we still had an EOD scene going on, as well as bodies stacked up in the club, and we were still treating individuals on the side. So it was a lot going on in that 6-hour span. Just to lay into, as I was approaching the scene, one of the things that I looked at it as it folded out, it was 117 casualties at this place. And out of that, 49 were dead, including 50, which is the suspect. OFD, we transported 16. OPD, the law enforcement, transported 15. So cops, as they touch an individual, they will just take them to the hospital because of the close proximity. Had we been 5-6 miles away, that probably wouldn't occur. But because of the close proximity to the hospital, they did just that. So just a little bird's eye view. So look at it, number of patients we transported, and how many different hospitals that was touched by this whole incident. It's good to note, as I stated, the number of law enforcement, a lot of law enforcement that was on the scene, a lot of agencies that we encountered that night. So if you can double that, about 200 people was on the scene from these multiple agencies that were standing around, including the victims, including just the chaos. It was just a chaotic scene at best. Emergency Operations Center went into effect at 2:05, and it ended. It was open for 2 weeks. It was so much going on behind the scenes that I tell you, the incident itself occurred and within that couple hour span, but the Emergency Operations Center stayed open 2 weeks, just dealing with victim family services. We dealt with mental health, Red Cross, you name it, we dealt with it. It went on for weeks and weeks at a time, just so we can get through that process. And during this whole thing, I would say the post-incident activities dealt with the president, from the president to Congress, you name it, everyone came, and we had to deal with that as well as continue to monitor the situation at the club and afterwards. One of the biggest one I want to make sure I jump on is caring for our own, and I definitely want to thank the local 1365 for what, and the international for stepping up right away. If you can imagine when all this stuff was going on, it is hard to think of everything at every time. And I would tell you, caring for your own is probably the biggest one. We had a lot of firefighters, first responders, cops that was affected by this whole situation. So getting in some type of peer support was priority number one, and trying to make sure they got the help they needed. And I definitely want to thank the local for that. They definitely helped us out. The administration at the city, you got EAP, but definitely just stepping up, taking care of our personnel the next day, trying to get some counseling going for those that encountered that the Post nightclub. But we got help from all over, I'll tell you. And just lesson learned, as I wrap up for the sake of time, getting through it fast. One of the things I would tell you, the biggest thing for us was communication. And daytime versus nighttime. I can tell you we had a skeleton crew at dispatch that night. It's 4 people working. And once the calls started coming in and events started happening, they got overwhelmed quick. And we have still an old paging system where you page and which did not work properly. But what we have implemented some changes since then that, anything of that nature, phone calls need to be done. You need to call chief staff, call myself, call the deputies, whoever you need to call. Start notifying people what's going on, because it was so much going on. Everybody got immersed in what was happening. So we learned some valuable lessons. Radio communication. It's a lot of people with radios. We realized that even at the hospitals, when transmissions being happening, it was a lot of communication outside of what was happening on the scene that we had to deal with on a regular basis. So this changed so fast. So we talked a lot about active shooter. It was active shooter for minutes. before it went to a hostage situation, it went to an EOD response. And we don't have a playbook per se that can cover everything, but we do have great SOPs that we do follow. But we are working on this, trying to a nice playbook going forward in the future, especially for the firefighters as well as the administrative staff. As of October 1, we adopted the Tactical Emergency Care TECC training for our personnel, trying to get everybody up to speed, so we will be more prepared going forward in the future. And at this point, we got about 95% of the department trained, ready to go. We just purchased new ballistic vests for every seat on the department. So we're making strides in the right way from the lessons learned we learned from Pulse and from Aurora, from San Bernardino, from different places that it can happen in the happiest place on earth, which is Orlando. Kudos to the hospital for what they did and their support. I'm gonna slip through that. And I'm gonna, for the sake of time,
For people who are just waking up, let me tell you what we know. This is a shooting that happened at Pulse. It's a gay nightclub in downtown Orlando.
The shooting began after 2 o'clock this morning. 49 victims killed. The worst mass shooting in American history.
There are more than a list of names. There are people who loved and were loved. There are people who had families and friends and dreams.
Our hearts are broken too. These families could be our families. In fact, they are our family. They're part of the American family.
From something tragic comes light, comes all these positive things, and that's what people need to focus on.
In spite of the ache, I will rise 1,000 times again.
But I definitely want to thank you guys. Pretty much, I hate to cut down a presentation an hour and a half down in 20 minutes. It's tough, but it's a lot of lessons learned that we learned from as an agency and that we're still learning. Just sitting up here and listening to the panel, I realize that there's so much more to learn and to do. So I just want to thank you for your support. It's still only been 7 months, so it's definitely still pretty fresh. It's an ongoing investigation still, so thank you.
Very good. Very good. Okay, so we have a few minutes for questions. So do we have questions? If you do have a question, there's a microphone right here in the center of the room. So if you want to proceed there, please do so. All right, anybody have questions? I have a couple, we'll do. Go ahead. There we go.
Good morning, Tom Dunn, Professional Firefighters of Nevada and Reno Firefighters Association, Local 731. One of the questions I have is that in the fire service as a whole, we have some generational differences. And that includes, we have the Vietnam generation of firefighters that are retiring. We also have a new generation of firefighters that are from the global war on terror. And one of the things that we're struggling with within our own department, and I think culturally throughout the fire service, is now what is being considered the militarization of the fire service based on these types of incidents. Any thoughts on how we address to the entire firefighting culture of our culture as a whole of improving our level of service to the community based on the current situation?
That's a great question. Guys, John, I think I knew you were going to be reaching because that's something that he's dealt with. Others who might want to respond
to this question, but I'm going to say one thing. I've heard this over and over again from police chiefs and fire chiefs. We are not in the same game anymore. We have the same situation in our shop. We are not in the same game anymore, and the answer is that the public expects it. The public expects a different response from you than they did before. They expect a different response from fire and a different response from police. That's their expectation, and that's our customer.
I couldn't agree. It's very challenging. Couldn't agree more. It's very challenging. You see a lot of differences in the way these younger kids learn, and their approach, I think, is largely different. But I do see a lot of good in these younger kids too. You know, it's like the 10%. 80%, 10%, 10% are the go-getters, 80% just, want to show up for work, and then the 10%, the lower 10% just try to do everything to defeat everything else. We have a lot of I have a lot of young kids that are highly motivated and want to do the job and want to do it well. And so, maybe they're the 10%ers, I don't know. It is tough, but I think that we have to do, as leaders, we have to do more to influence them. It's not just, like I said before, it's not just what the captain says, I think we do have to show them the data. We got to show it to them in a way that they want to see it, videos and, their phones, and, we're going to, we're doing online training now. So I think we have to adapt, and we also have to, we have to look to them to give us some of the answers.
Okay.
So to answer your question, I don't really know, okay? But I don't think it's all bad. Because, last thing, sorry, came on, and I'm trying to look at the good at the kids coming in.
Chief, you had something.
Yeah, I think you touched on it. I think the biggest thing is to educate and leave it better than you found it. And I think the younger generation want to be trained. I think as we owe it to ourselves, the older firefighters that's maybe heading out in the next couple of years, to make sure we leave this place better than we found it. If we train them, we equip them, they'll do it. So educated department is a better trained department. So it's incumbent upon leaders in the organization to train. There's no way to do it. There's no easy way to do it besides train. But we have to get the resources and make sure our resources are going more so to training and development to then the other stuff that may not benefit us so much. So as we look at our calendars and our scheduling, if it's not about training, as well as the managers, because a lot of things I can say about Pulse, it's not necessarily the young guys, it was some of the older leadership that they expected more. So we owe it to ourselves as leaders from the top down, bottom up accountability. So you have to train and educate those individuals as well as the managers.
Very good. Go ahead, Kate.
And just one thing, I worked with it. We brought in a contingent from England in March to talk about issues. And one of the things that really astonished them was that they have a national fire, a national police, and a national EMS. And they can't understand why we don't have that in the United States. I think what happens is because fire and EMS and where they are, you guys you also don't have that national voice. And I think you need to demand that of us. Your organization, your officers, your department people need to demand of the federal agencies the same level of training support that we provide to police. Just because there isn't a national fire overseer doesn't mean that you shouldn't get the same benefits that the other first responders get.
Okay. Another question.
Hi, my name's Vince Leah, local 1841, Leominster, Massachusetts. I come from a smaller town of about 50,000 people. I kind of have an odd question. What if you're now the first responder and now you're the parent of the child at the school inside? Because it could very well happen in my town that multiple parents on the job could be showing up to a school that has an active shooter. So how do you deal with your first responder that is now a concerned parent with a child inside? Because I know any one of us would probably freak out and run right in.
I don't know if you can deal with it, but we, at the Pulse incident, we had one of our firefighters whose daughter was actually in the club doing a shooting. When she called laying on the floor, when bullets was raining out, she was calling her mother, and her father was happening to be home. He's a firefighter. He immediately jumped in his vehicle, made his way down the scene, put his shirt on, but he had to go through all the same barricades and end up going through the process of what we was doing for victims and people from that club. So I don't think it's a clear-cut answer what to do with it, but we just need to we understand we're parents and we're fathers and brothers and stuff first. We just have to make sure we give them that platform or that support they need. And I think that's what it comes down to, that peer support. Because if you have a child and they're hurt, you're thinking like a father, not necessarily a firefighter or a police officer. So I don't know if it's a clear-cut answer, but what he did, it came down to the club, went through the whole process till he got to his daughter, who luckily was not hurt. But he definitely did exactly what you said. He just jumped in his vehicle, put his uniform on so he can get close to the scene. And, I commend him because that was his child.
Any other thoughts on that? Okay, another question.
Ralph Supa, Anne Arundel County, Local 1563. During any of these events, obviously they're overwhelming, but was there a major structure fire or some other major event, because your communications is obviously overwhelmed, but obviously your resources are taxed as well? How did you guys handle that? If not, what would be insight now into that happening?
That's a great question. Ryan, I know Kate, I'm sorry. Ryan has talked about this multiple threat and preparedness. So Ryan, we've talked some about that. Why don't you share that?
Yeah, during our incident, our battalion chief requested 2 strike teams of engines to cover the city, and then requested an additional 2 strike teams of engines to cover additional responses in the area. We had people calling from IP addresses and stating that there's an active shooter at Amazon. Amazon is a 2 million square foot 2 million square foot building. And so we had a whole different response, responding to only those calls based off of the law enforcement. I think they had 20 officers designated from surrounding agencies as just a response for other incidents related to that incident. Then we had the response just within our cities from the other team. So you have to, once that incident happens, you also have to think about the other incidents that are going to occur. Patton State Hospital, which is a mental hospital where we store some of the hardest criminals, that reported an active shooter there. We had a guy from Amazon that heard the initial shots that were being fired from the shootout that jumped over the fence and started running across the airport. Somebody reported right across the runway. And now they're reporting that there's a guy with a bomb on the airport trying to, so there's incidents within the incidents, and you have to get those set up right away. That'll be the chief officer's response that's not involved with the incident at the level to, hey, we need to still run our city. We need to plan for these extra incidents that are going to happen within, because there's those copycatters out there. They were on Twitter basically laughing at us, saying, haha, we got you from this to this. And they actually had a guy show up at our fire station, basically threatening us because of the Islamic religion and what had happened, and they were claiming it was an ISIS event. So we had to lock down that station. We had about 4 or 5 different incidents within that incident, but luckily we were prepared for it, and our battalion chiefs were heads up to get all those units and resources. Luckily we had those units and resources because it is a large city and large cities surrounding that area. So we need to plan for that.
And back to Kate's, it can happen. So Kate, final word.
Just on the fire, on the issue of whether there's a fire, I'll tell you, in our research, there has not been a structural fire that's accompanied any of these incidents. But when the Brits were over here in our study of all the activities overseas, in almost every single incident that's occurred overseas, Brussels, Paris, you name it, there is a fire involved. And so their police officers train to borrow fire equipment, breathing apparatus to get through the smoke to get to the shooting scene. And that's one of the trainings that they do routinely overseas. We haven't dealt with fire here, but we just haven't had the unfortunate chance yet. We will. And every single incident overseas, particularly the terrorist incidents, involve something that involves smoke and fire.
Yep. Okay. Guys, we are out of time, but I know you have more questions. I'm going to ask our panelists just to remain over in this corner for more questions. I just want to wrap up with a couple of comments, though, if I may. The IFF has policy on active shooter response and on rescue task forces. So a couple of the items from those policies I wanted to share with you so you were aware of them. Certainly the Unified Incident Command, your SOPs should have that. We've got to have the Unified Command. Common terminology, absolutely, in IFF policy. Rescue task forces, the warm zone entry, law enforcement and fire departments training together, protective gear, the ballistic gear, and we didn't get into a lot of detail. We have gathered much more intelligence on that, so we do have resources available if you have questions about that on the IFF website. And then something that Chief Williams brought up was the post-behavioral health programs. Our peer counseling team, and in fact in this room in just a half hour, they're going to be talking more about the PTS after the shooting stops. And Kate, I've heard you say that, right? After the shooting stops, how do we deal with the responders and the trauma they may have experienced? And so those kinds of things you've got to be aware of. And so our policy certainly looks at that as well. So please join me in thanking our panelists today. And then if you have questions, please see them over here to the side. I'll make available all of the resources from the FBI out at the technical assistance booths. So if you're looking for that, and then we'll give you the information if you want to order more of this for your locals, okay? So please join me in thanking our panelists today. Thank you all very much for your attention. And don't forget your evaluations and the iPad mini availability, so please go on and do your evaluations on the app. Thank you.